Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very exciting day today. Hey, the final series of the State of Origin, the third match today. So what's your reckon? So that's why I've got a bit of maroon, got a bit of blue there as well. Of course, we know Maroons have already won, but making it three straight would be a challenge. So the final game of the State of Origin series between New South Wales and Queensland will be hosted in Sydney. And here's what you need to know. The game 3, the New South Wales versus Queensland, will go to battle in game 3 of the State of Origin series today. The Maroons start game 1 at 26 to 18 scoreline at Adelaide Oval and reclaim the shield in game 2 with the staggering 32.6 victory at Suncorp Stadium. So well done, Maroons. So where is this State of Origin 3 being held? The game 3 will see the Blues welcome the Maroons to Accor Stadium tonight. So game 1 was held in the neutral turf of South Australia's Adelaide Oval, and game 2 was hosted at the Queensland Suncorp Stadium. The third one tonight will be at the Accor Stadium in Sydney. So what time will it kick off and start? Game 3 will commence at the same time as game 1 and 2 with kickoff at around 8:05 p.m., which is Australian Standard Eastern Time. So if you're looking at the time in Sydney and Melbourne, 8:05, in Brisbane 8:05, in Adelaide 7:35, in Perth at about 6:05. And if you're watching from across the Tasman in New Zealand, the kickoff time would be 10:05. Fans will be able to watch the 2023 State of Origin series exclusively on free-to-air Channel 9, broadcasting all 3 games. The action will also be available via stream via 9 Now. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on the Game 3 of the State of Origin, which is going to be happening tonight. Well, before that, let's go to the breaking news or the news in brief.
Australia has failed to reach an agreement on a planned free trade deal with the European Union after tough negotiations in Belgium. The two sides have been locked in talks for 5 years, with the Trade Minister Don Farrell making a quick trip to Brussels this week in an attempt to end the deadlock. The EU has threatened the right of Australian producers to use names such as Prosecco and Feta due to its strict so-called geographic indicators.
We've made it very clear right from the start that we won't simply accept any agreement. The agreement from the Australian point of view has to achieve meaningful agricultural access to European markets, and that's what we are continuing to pursue in these negotiations.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has held a series of talks on the sidelines of the NATO summit, a meeting dominated so far by Ukraine's moves to join the alliance. NATO leaders have removed one of the hurdles for Ukraine to join the group, but have stopped short of handing Kiev an invitation or timetable to admission. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says it's unprecedented and absurd that a time frame hasn't been set. The bosses of Australia's Big Four banks are set for a grilling by parliamentarians today, facing pressure to do more to tackle scams and questions over interest rates. Banks have been quick to pass on increases in interest rates to borrowers, but they've been slower to pass them on to savers. The committee will also pile on pressure over the bank's treatment of scammed customers. And debate is growing in the Northern Territory over crocodile culling after an attack at a popular tourist spot in the Litchfield National Park earlier this week. Authorities yesterday euthanised the male saltwater crocodile involved. The Chief Minister, Natasha Fyles, says she will ask the federal government to consider a cull.
So they were, no fault of the animal, I'd say, that's their natural habitat, that's their area, and we should have better protection and probably keep people away from those sorts of areas. Right now, let's look at what happened with the deal. Why did the deal not go through?
Don Farrell has just ended that two-day trip to Brussels where he met with his European counterpart in hopes that these negotiations, which have been going on for 5 years since 2018, would come to a conclusion. There had been a hope that it would be a quick deal over a deal that could be worth, as you said, almost $100 billion. Now, there were some key differences between Europe and Australia that seem to remain unsolved, particularly over to which degree the EU will open up its markets to Australian farm products, notably beef, as you mentioned, and also the so-called geographical indicators. That those have been a sticking point, and that's Europe demanding Australia no longer use the names of hundreds of products. Like you said, the future of Australian producers using terms like Prosecco and Feta could be at risk. Now, Don Farrell has said he's pretty disappointed that the deal hasn't been concluded. He said Australia was not offered a deal that it could agree to or accept, and it wasn't even close. He says Australia won't sign a deal just for the sake of it. Here's what he had to say.
We've made it very clear right from the start that we won't simply accept any agreement. The agreement from the Australian point of view has to achieve meaningful agricultural access to European markets, and that's what we are continuing to pursue in these negotiations.
Now, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese also raised this deal when he met with Germany's leader during his trip this week. He says he hopes that a deal can eventually be finalised. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few months. We know that ahead of that trip, Don Farrell did flag that he's prepared to extend negotiations into the second half of the year if he needs to.
To get more, we can bring in our fourth-generation winemaker, Catherine Brown from Brown Brothers in Millewa. Catherine, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
As a very big wine producer, as a big wine exporter, what do you think about the breakdown again of these free trade talks?
Well, I actually see a positive in this. The fact that the Australian government have walked away from these talks because they don't see what EU is putting on the table. They see as quite unfair and not beneficial for the farmers, the primary producers like ourselves out there. So this is a good outcome. It shows that our government is listening to us and they see the importance of grape varieties such as Prosecco and making sure we hold on tight to these names.
Why is that important from your perspective?
So in this situation, we're fighting the name Prosecco. It is a grape variety and the Italians are trying to take that away from us by saying that that's now a geographical indicator. We feel that if this goes through and if we do lose Prosecco, this just opens a gate to all the other grape varieties out there. There's amazing grape varieties from Italy such as Fiano, Sangiovese and Montepulciano. If we lose the Prosecco, what's next? What are they going to take away from us? If the Italians get the ball rolling, the French might turn around and take Chardonnay and Shiraz away from us too.
Yes, we can't imagine that. So you're quite prepared for the government to hold fast on this, even if it means no deal anytime soon?
I think the only way that we can have a deal is if it's of benefit to us, to all Australians. So I feel that our government's over there in Brussels doing the absolute correct thing for all of us, for the consumer, for the producer, to make sure that we get the right deal and that the EU is not just going to walk all over us.
How big a potential or bigger potential market would it be for Australian wine producers if there was a free trade deal struck eventually between Australia and the EU?
Really, my focus at the moment is being able to keep our names and especially the name of the grape varieties for focusing on the domestic market. So that's really where my head's at the moment, rather than looking at the overall picture of what our politicians are there talking about in terms of the overall fair trade agreement.
Always great getting your perspective, Catherine. Asking for a friend, what's good this season? What do you recommend?
We've had it's been a tough vintage, to tell you the truth, with all this wet weather. But the Chardonnays are just looking fantastic. There's really great acid, so which is what you want in a good Chardonnay. So keep your eye out for the 2023 Chardonnays coming through. And
let's hope Australian wine producers can keep the name Chardonnay as these talks go on. Catherine, thank you.
And thank you very much for that report. So there you are, the EU free trade deal. At a standstill, it's a no deal. Now for our next news, we go to the medical scene. As we know, abortion in Australia is legal, but it is not always easily accessible. Here's that report.
Abortions might be legal in Australia, but it doesn't mean they're easily accessible.
I had a young woman come in who fit the bill absolutely perfectly, but my registration is currently lapsed and I wasn't able to prescribe for her.
Just 1 in 10 GPs currently prescribe medical abortions.
The clock is ticking. These procedures have to be performed before 9 weeks.
Currently, doctors, nurse practitioners and pharmacists need extra training to prescribe abortion pills. But now the national regulator is removing those requirements from next month for the medication MS two-step. The treatment works using a combination of 2 medications, mifepristone and misoprostol. A patient will take the first, blocking the hormone needed for a pregnancy to progress. Then, a couple of days later, they take the second dose of tablets, prompting the body to expel the tissue.
What today symbolises is that people who are financially vulnerable or marginalised geographically, or whether that's in social determinants of health, don't have to leave their communities to try and access care.
And politicians are celebrating too.
So there's some urgency about getting the treatment early, and so we think this is a really practical, good change that will help a lot of women.
1 in 3 Australian women will have an abortion at some point, with those in regional and remote areas facing the highest barriers to access. While doctors are welcoming these changes, they say much more needs to be done to ensure no one misses out on care. Claudia Long, ABC News, Canberra.
So there you go. Whether you believe in it or don't is another matter. But, the call out there is for it to be more easily and more readily available. For our next news, let's go to Sydney, where the tolls, there's been a call that the tolls be more fairer.
Untangling Sydney's complex toll system is no easy road.
We're looking essentially for win-win outcomes.
The companies that cash in every time an e-tag beeps aren't keen to be losers. But even they agree the cost has become too much for some to bear.
We understand the significant challenges that Australian families are facing with cost of living pressures. We do acknowledge that for a small percentage of customers, financial hardship is very much a real issue.
To try to make the system simpler and fairer, a range of options are being considered by the independent review. One is a system where a driver pays an access charge to enter the motorway network, then a distance-based fee that could vary depending on which area of Sydney they're travelling through.
We would be very happy to explore that as a concept. It is a model that we think would work for Sydney.
Other ideas were also raised at the hearing, such as having an independent regulator like IPART set tolls in the same way it determines gas and electricity prices.
Transparent discussions rather than mysteries about how these tolls are priced, set, changed.
And wealthy drivers may want to watch out too, with means tests for toll relief also on the table.
Could mean that some very well-off people who benefit from the present scheme might lose out on it. That's quite possible.
Whatever solutions are proposed at the end of this process, there's one major stumbling block. The government's locked into decades-long contracts with the toll road operators, and it's never revealed how much it would have to compensate them for changes that hit their bottom lines. Sarah Gerrithy, ABC News.
So there you go. Which way do we go? But my take on that is that it should be a fairer system. In a way, they're talking about that some wealthy people might want to miss out. It should not matter whether you reach a poor or whatever. The tolls are the tolls, and they need to be just equal and the same for each and everyone. Right now, another news that we'd like to feature today is police is trying to lift the lid of the spate of underworld killings in Sydney.
Witnesses ran for cover as gunshots rang out on one of the busiest streets in Sydney's inner west.
There were several gunshots, and then I saw a man run out, jump into a car.
It is very brazen, and that's why we believe it's obviously a targeted attack.
Are either of them known to police?
Both are known to police.
Two brothers with bikie links, wounded but alive, are the latest casualties in a conflict marked by public shootings, incinerated getaway vehicles and in just over 2 years, 18 bodies.
I think police thought they had a lid on it. They had slowed down a major conflict between the Alameddines and the Hamsies. But now, in the last couple of months, there seems to be a new conflict, and it could be internal in the Comanchero. The death of Alan Meridian is a big hit.
Alan Meridian's last ride marked the early and predictable demise of a flashy Sydney gangster. His Comanchero connections could not protect him.
He had been for the last, since at least August, aware that he was going to be killed, that there was a hit on him. He was moving around. He'd moved out of the family home, which was outside of Sydney, to protect his family. He'd been switching cars.
Sydney is reeling from another gangland execution. Alan Meridian was shot dead in the front seat of his car at Bondi Junction this morning.
His killers tracked him to the basement car park of his eastern suburbs bolt hole.
They knew the vehicle, they knew the location. It was 8:15 in the morning. So they've allowed him to enter the driver's seat of a motor vehicle, be confined to that space, and they've shot him at close range through the window, half a dozen times.
There was a fairly strong degree of sophistication around his murder. We know that then post the actual shooting incident, that at least 2 other vehicles were then burnt out. That brings with it some complexities and lots of pre-planning and post-planning.
In the early 2000s, Meridian had been central to a cocaine syndicate nicknamed the Golden Gun.
He had the connections, the overseas connections, and the door into Sydney. And by that I mean he had the ability to open the door for importation of prohibited drugs from both America and Central America.
His excesses, revealed at trial, stood out even in the ostentatious world of cocaine gangsters. In 2007, Ryan Jeffcoates was part of the police team that entered Meridian's Sydney home.
Hand railing, toilet roll holders, knives and forks in the drawer. I remember being gold-plated Versace knives and forks that they were eating dinner off. I remember the lounge room roof was like the Sistine Chapel.
Meridian was jailed for 10 years and still on parole when police warned him last year he had a price on his head.
And I think we have a duty of care and a moral obligation to let people know that they may be at threat.
Meridian's parole conditions wouldn't let him get out of Dodge.
If you don't want to be subject to a parole condition and go overseas, then don't commit a crime in the first place.
Meridian is the latest fatality in a loosely connected set of underworld killings that began in 2020 and bottomed out last August with the execution of 2 friends en route to an engagement party.
2 women on a night out with friends have been murdered on a suburban street.
Lametta Fadlala was a former business partner of Alan Meridian's ex-wife. She had strong gangland connections.
One theory is that it was a target attack because of her past relationships with other known identities.
Tonight, Sydney's gangland war claims another victim.
Last May, Comanchero Omar Zahed was murdered at an Auburn gym. His brother, Tarek, also a Comanchero, was shot but survived.
And I just scared I will get shot.
The getaway car was incinerated. New South Wales Police have long had their sights on the Comanchero gang.
They're really an organised crime entity. They're an organised crime business. Their business is drug distribution. Their business is putting misery onto the citizens of this state.
They've linked up with the Alameddine clan, who are very powerful Middle Eastern organised crime family in Sydney's southwest. So the Alameddines and the Comancheros have joined forces, and that is a really scary thing that police have had to confront. And between them, they have caused most of the bloodshed that we've seen in the last 2 years, almost exclusively.
Recent killings have little to do with a faded conflict between the Alameddine and Hamsi crime families.
People have leveraged the so-called dispute between 2 families for their own purposes.
10 people have been charged with murder so far over the 18 killings. Jason Weinstein says investigators are unravelling the networks responsible.
14 of the 18, we have taken out a number of syndicates and people who facilitated or were party to those murders.
This gangland stoush is brought to you via CCTV and by TikTok.
Comanchero boss Tariq Zahed is shot at again, but this time it's by the police.
Where a new audience is discovering veteran crime reporter Mark Morrie.
So people are seen on social media, they're actually seeing people being shot. The cars are on fire everywhere, there's this vision everywhere. Also, these gangsters live on social media, so there's imagery of them everywhere. In the old days, literally, guys would go missing in gangland wars, or they were shot in the back of the head at midnight and buried in a shallow grave. Now it's all been done out in public, so the perception that there's more murders is because of the fact that they're a lot more visible because they're captured on TV.
The head of New South Wales Bureau of Crime Statistics, Jackie Fitzgerald, says the perception that Sydney is awash with blood doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
In the most recent year, we've had 10 firearm murders in New South Wales, and that's really amongst the lowest we've ever seen, and certainly a big fall from 28 years ago when we were looking at around 36 firearm murders in New South Wales. By any measure, they're very serious crimes, and those crimes are topical. Those crimes are ones that capture the public interest.
Now, I can recall in 2013 there was 314 organised crime or related shooting instances. We've had something around the vicinity of about 50 this year only.
Combined with the ostentatious lifestyles of this crop of criminals, there's some compelling content.
It seems the young people are really attracted to this underworld and all these hits. It's this lure of a glamorous life. You know, it's not too glamorous in Rookwood, I'm telling you now.
So there you are, it says crime never pays. Yes, glamorous it might look.
Fantasmagorically magical. This is for you, boy.
Girl, she got married to a boy like you. She'd kick you out if she ever knew about all the You tell me that you do. Dirty, dirty boy. You know everyone is talking on the scene. I hear them whispering about the places that you've been and how you don't know how to keep your business clean.
Namaste, hi and hello to everyone. This is Geeta Kapoor. I'm coming to Brisbane, Australia on the 22nd of September and to Melbourne on the 24th of September 2023 to witness some great talent on a wonderful platform called Australia's Great Dancers. This event is brought by Shaurya Entertainment and I can't wait to see the talent that it brings there. See you soon. Lots of love. God bless.
So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio. Hey, it's been wonderful having your company. So until tomorrow, it's goodbye from us.